The river doesn't ask permission. It simply arrives each year, brown and heavy with sediment from lands no Egyptian has ever seen. When the water retreats, it leaves behind a dark stripe of earth, rich, workable, impossibly fertile. This is not metaphor. This is the mechanism by which a civilization is born. You stand on the west bank as the sun climbs. The air already carries heat, but it's the dry heat of stone and sand, not the oppressive weight of jungle humidity. Across the river, the city is waking. Smoke from cooking fires rises in thin columns. The sound of wooden mallets on copper chisels travels across water with perfect clarity. This is the third dynasty. The year, by our reckoning, is approximately 2650 BCE. The king, though that word feels inadequate, has commissioned something unprecedented. Not a tomb of mud brick that will melt back into the earth within generations. Not a mastaba of stone that sits heavy and squat against the sand. Something vertical. Something that defies the horizontal logic of the desert. The architect's name is Imhotep. He is not royal by birth. He is a commoner who understands mathematics, astronomy, stone, and perhaps most crucially, the organizational capacity required to move mountains one block at a time. Watch how they work. The quarry is upstream, where limestone beds run deep and accessible. The stone cutters do not hack randomly. They understand the grain, the hidden fault lines, the way a wedge of wood, soaked in water until it swells, can split stone along predetermined lines. Each block weighs approximately 2.5 tons. There are no horses in Egypt yet, those will come later, with the Hyksos invaders. No iron tools. Iron is still rare, precious, barely understood. Copper chisels. Wooden sledges. Ropes woven from papyrus and flax. And thousands of men organized into crews with names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, names that suggest not slavery, but something closer to collective pride, seasonal labor during the inundation when farming is impossible anyway. The blocks move on sledges pulled across wooden rollers. Someone discovered, perhaps by accident, perhaps by methodical testing, that wet sand provides less friction than dry. So water carriers walk ahead of each sledge, dampening the path. Physics and empirical observation, applied without the formal language of science but with perfect practical understanding. The step pyramid rises in stages. 6 platforms, each smaller than the one below, climbing to a height of 60 meters. It is not yet the smooth-sided geometry of the later pyramids at Giza. It retains something of the ancient mastaba form, stacked and stretched skyward. But it is revolutionary. Around it, Imhotep designs a complex of courtyards, chapels, colonnades, the first known use of stone columns in architecture. Before this, columns were wood or bundled papyrus. These are limestone, carved to mimic the organic forms of plant stalks, preserving in stone the memory of earlier materials. Architecture as cultural memory, frozen in calcium carbonate. The complex covers 15 hectares. It is enclosed by a wall of white limestone, 10 meters high, with only one true entrance, a psychological compression before the expansion of the interior spaces. This is not accidental. Every sightline, every progression from darkness to light, from narrow to wide, is designed to create specific emotional and cognitive responses. You walk through the entrance corridor. The ceiling is low. The walls press close. Then you emerge into the southern court, and the space opens dramatically. The pyramid dominates the western edge, but your eye is also drawn to the smaller structures, buildings whose function we can only partially reconstruct. Set festival courts, perhaps, where the king would ritually demonstrate his continued physical capability to rule. Storage for offerings. Chambers whose purpose died with the last priest who knew their secret use. The labor is seasonal, organized, fed. Recent archaeological evidence from workers' villages shows a diet surprisingly rich in meat, cattle, sheep, goat. The workers are not enslaved foreigners but Egyptian citizens, some conscripted through corvée labor systems, others specialists who work year-round. The bakeries discovered near the pyramid sites could produce enough bread to feed thousands daily. The brewery could produce enough beer, thick, nutritious, more food than intoxicant, to sustain heavy labor in brutal heat. This is the engine of the Old Kingdom. Not cruelty, though there is certainly hierarchy and compulsion, but primarily, surplus. The Nile's annual gift of fertility produces enough grain to free a significant portion of the population from constant subsistence agriculture. That surplus can be redirected into monument building, into specialized crafts, into the development of administrative systems capable of tracking resources across hundreds of kilometers. By the 4th dynasty, the architecture evolves. Khufu, the Greeks will call him Cheops, commissions a pyramid that will remain the tallest human-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. The Great Pyramid at Giza. Originally 146 meters high, covered in polished white limestone that reflects the sun like a second star. The peak is capped in electrum, an alloy of gold and silver that catches the first and last light of each day. The precision is almost offensive to our assumptions about ancient capability. The base is leveled to within 2.1 centimeters across a foundation of 230 meters per side. The 4 sides align to the cardinal directions with an error of less than 4 minutes of arc. This requires astronomical observation, careful measurement, and mathematical understanding that we're only recently learning to fully appreciate. Inside, the Grand Gallery rises at a 26-degree angle, corbelled in a way that distributes weight laterally. The King's Chamber is roofed with 9 slabs of granite, each weighing approximately 50 tons, transported from quarries at Aswan, 800 kilometers upstream. Above that, 5 relieving chambers further distribute the weight of the pyramid's mass, 2,300,000 blocks of stone. The engineering is sophisticated, but it's also adaptive. Evidence suggests the internal passages were modified during construction, that the architects problem-solved in real time, adjusting to unforeseen stresses and structural requirements. This is not the execution of a perfect plan received from the heavens. This is iterative engineering, brilliant and pragmatic. The pyramid complex extends beyond the pyramid itself. A causeway, originally covered and decorated with reliefs, connects the pyramid to a valley temple at the edge of the cultivation. This temple is where the boat bearing the king's body would arrive, carried up the Nile from Memphis. The causeway rises gradually, nearly half a kilometer long, channeling mourners and priests from the realm of the living toward the realm of the eternal. Adjacent to Khufu's pyramid, his son Khafre builds a second pyramid, slightly smaller but appearing taller because it's built on higher ground. And Khafre adds something unprecedented, the Great Sphinx. Carved from a limestone outcrop, the Sphinx is a lion's body with a human head, likely Khafre's own face, facing east toward the rising sun. It measures 73 meters long and 20 meters high. Between its paws, later rulers will place stele describing restoration efforts, dreams, and dedications. The Sphinx becomes, over millennia, a symbol of mystery itself, half buried in sand, witness to empires that rise and fall around it. The third major pyramid at Giza belongs to Menkaure, Khafre's successor. It is smaller, about half the height of Khufu's, but constructed with greater attention to detail. The lower courses are encased in red granite from Aswan, more difficult to work than limestone but far more durable. The shift suggests not decline but refinement, a different set of priorities. Around these 3 pyramids, smaller pyramids for queens, mastaba tombs for nobles and officials, boat pits containing disassembled cedar ships. One such ship, found in a sealed pit beside Khufu's pyramid in 1954, was reassembled. It is 43 meters long, made of Lebanese cedar, held together with rope, without a single metal fastener. It may have been used to transport the king's body to Giza, or it may be a symbolic vessel for the afterlife journey. Either way, it is functional, a real boat, capable of sailing, preserved by dry sand and sealed stone for 4,500 years. The Old Kingdom is not only pyramids. At Saqqara, nobles commissioned tombs decorated with vibrant reliefs showing daily life, farmers plowing, fishermen netting, bakers baking, brewers brewing, butchers butchering. These are not romantic idealizations but detailed records of economic activity, of the systems that produce the surplus that funds the pyramids. The tomb of Ti, a high official of the 5th dynasty, shows him overseeing all of this, seated, larger than the workers around him, a visual representation of hierarchy encoded in art. But the Old Kingdom ends. The reasons are complex and debated. Climate change may have reduced Nile floods. The cost of pyramid building may have drained resources. Provincial governors may have accumulated too much independent power. By the end of the 6th dynasty, around 2180 BCE, central authority collapses. The first intermediate period begins, a time of fragmentation, local warlords, competing claims to kingship. The literature of this period is darker, more skeptical. The Admonitions of Epure describes a world turned upside down, the poor wearing fine linen, the rich starving, tombs robbed, order dissolved. Whether this is historical description or rhetorical exaggeration, It reflects a society grappling with the loss of certainty. The Middle Kingdom begins when Mentuhotep II of Thebes reunifies Egypt around 2055 BCE. The capital moves from Memphis to Thebes in the south. The art becomes more naturalistic, less rigidly formal. The literature becomes more introspective. The tale of Sinuh tells of an official who flees Egypt, lives in exile in Syria, achieves success there, but ultimately longs for home and burial in Egyptian soil. It is a meditation on identity, belonging, and the pull of homeland. Middle Kingdom pyramids are smaller, often built with mud brick cores rather than solid stone. But the funerary texts, once exclusive to kings, begin appearing in the tombs of nobles and officials. The coffin texts democratize, to some degree, access to the afterlife. The exclusive becomes available to a wider elite. The Middle Kingdom also sees Egypt's first sustained engagement with Nubia. A series of massive fortresses is constructed along the Second Cataract of the Nile, in what is now Sudan. These are not simple walls but sophisticated military installations. The fortress at Buhen has walls over 10 meters high and 5 meters thick, with bastions, moats, and carefully designed killing zones. The walls are crenellated, with loopholes for archers. The gates are multi-layered, with portcullises and right-angle turns that slow and expose attackers. These fortresses control trade routes, gold, ebony, ivory, incense flowing north from Nubia and Central Africa, but they also reflect a new military reality. Egypt is no longer isolated by desert barriers. It must actively defend and expand. The Middle Kingdom ends, like the Old, with fragmentation. The Second Intermediate Period begins around 1650 BCE with the arrival of the Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands, probably Canaanite or Amorite peoples who infiltrate, then dominate, the Nile Delta. They introduce new military technologies. The composite bow, made of wood, horn, and sinew, far more powerful than the simple wooden bow. The horse and chariot, which revolutionize warfare. Bronze working techniques that produce harder, sharper weapons. The Hyksos rule from Avarice in the delta while Egyptian kings hold Thebes in the south. It is Ahmose I, around 1550 BCE, who finally expels the Hyksos, pursues them into Canaan, and inaugurates the New Kingdom, Egypt's imperial age. The New Kingdom transforms Egypt into the dominant power of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Military expansion becomes state policy. Thutmose I campaigns to the Euphrates River, setting up a stele to mark Egyptian territory. His grandson, Thutmose III, is perhaps the greatest warrior pharaoh in Egyptian history. Over a reign of nearly 54 years, he conducts 17 military campaigns, systematically reducing the city-states of Canaan and Syria to vassalage. The Battle of Megiddo, fought around 1457 BCE, is the first battle in history for which we have detailed tactical information. Thutmose III faces a coalition of Canaanite princes at Megiddo, a strategic city controlling trade routes. His generals advise taking a safer, longer route. Thutmose chooses a narrow, dangerous pass, gambling that surprise will compensate for vulnerability. He emerges, deploys his forces, and wins decisively. The siege of Megiddo lasts 7 months. When the city falls, Thutmose takes tribute and hostages, including the sons of defeated kings, who are sent to Egypt to be raised at court, learning Egyptian language and customs, becoming loyal vassals when they return to rule their own cities. This is not just conquest. It is a system of control, military, economic, and cultural. Tribute flows into Egypt, gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, horses from Syria, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan via trade networks, exotic animals, wine, olive oil. The wealth funds temple construction on an unprecedented scale. Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs, rules during the early 18th dynasty, initially as regent for her stepson Thutmose III, then as pharaoh in her own right. She emphasizes trade over warfare, sending an expedition to the land of Punt, probably modern Somalia or Eritrea, to obtain myrrh, frankincense, ebony, and exotic animals. The expedition is documented in detailed reliefs at her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, showing Egyptian ships loaded with goods, Puntite houses on stilts, even the Queen of Punt herself, depicted with what may be a pathological condition causing obesity. Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahari is architectural brilliance. It rises in 3 terraced levels against the cliffs of the Theban necropolis, connected by ramps. The colonnades are elegant, the proportions harmonious. It is designed not to dominate the landscape but to integrate with it, the man-made echoing the natural. But Hatshepsut's memory is attacked after her death. Her images are chiseled from monuments. Her cartouches are erased. The reasons are debated: political legitimacy, personal animosity, or simply the erasure of an anomalous female ruler to restore traditional male succession. Whatever the motive, the erasure is incomplete. Enough survives to reconstruct her reign. The new kingdom reaches its zenith under Amenhotep III. His reign, around 1390 to 1352 BCE, is peaceful and prosperous. He builds extensively: the Temple of Luxor, expansions at Karnak, his mortuary temple on the West Bank, now mostly destroyed, though the 2 massive seated statues, the colossi of Memnon, still stand. He corresponds with foreign kings as equals, exchanging gifts, arranging diplomatic marriages. Gold flows from Nubian mines. Egypt is wealthy, confident, secure. Then comes Akhenaten. Amenhotep IV changes his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and initiates one of the most radical experiments in ancient history. He moves the capital from Thebes to a new city, Akhetaten, modern Amarna, built from nothing in the desert. He promotes the worship of the Aten, the sun disk, above all other gods. Whether this is true monotheism or extreme henotheism is debated, but it disrupts the traditional priesthood, particularly the powerful priests of Ammonius at Thebes. The art of the Amarna period breaks with convention. Akhenaten is depicted with an elongated face, narrow shoulders, wide hips, a prominent belly, features so distinctive they've led to speculation about genetic disorders, though they may simply be stylistic choices emphasizing fertility and androgyny. His wife, Nefertiti, is shown with equal prominence, sometimes in traditionally male roles. The famous bust of Nefertiti, discovered in the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose, shows her in idealized beauty, high cheekbones, graceful neck, serene expression, but the crown she wears is unique, not found on any other queen. Akhenaten's experiment dies with him. His son, the boy king Tutankhamun, is pressured by the old priesthood to restore traditional worship. He changes his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Ammonius, moves the capital back to Thebes, and dies around age 18 or 19. His tomb, small and hastily prepared, is forgotten, buried under debris from later construction. When Howard Carter discovers it in 1922, it is virtually intact, the only royal tomb of the New Kingdom to survive largely unlooted. The objects inside Tutankhamun's tomb are astonishing not because he was a great king, he wasn't, but because they show what even a minor pharaoh was buried with. If this is a minor tomb, what must the great tombs have contained before they were robbed? The gold funerary mask is iconic, beaten gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli and colored glass, the face serene, the eyes wide and eternal. It weighs 11 kilograms. Inside it the king's mummified head. The nested coffins, 3 of them, one inside the other, the innermost made of solid gold weighing 110 kilograms. The outermost coffin is gilded wood, decorated with protective goddesses spreading their wings. The shrine, actually 4 gilded wooden shrines nested around the sarcophagus, each covered with protective texts and imagery. Dismantling them in the cramped tomb took Carter and his team weeks. And then the smaller objects, model boats, chariots, weapons, clothing, jewelry, furniture, games, oils, food, wine. Everything the king might need in the afterlife. The objects are functional, beautiful, and deeply revealing of Egyptian material culture. Consider a single object, the lion-headed bed found in the tomb. The frame is wood, the legs carved as lion paws, the sides decorated with protective deities. The mattress would have been woven reeds or leather straps. This is furniture designed for both this life and the next, beautiful and practical, symbolic and functional. The jewelry is equally remarkable. Pectorals, large ornamental pieces worn on the chest, are made of gold sheet worked with inlays of semi-precious stones. The designs are complex: scarabs pushing the sun disk, protective vultures, hieroglyphs spelling the king's name. The craftsmanship requires understanding of metallurgy, how to anneal gold so it can be worked without cracking, how to create cloisons, small cells, to hold inlays, how to cut and polish stones to exact shapes, how to create adhesives that will hold for millennia. Or consider the bow found in the tomb. It is a composite bow, made of layers of wood, horn, and sinew, glued and bound together. When strung, it requires significant strength to draw, perhaps 60 to 80 pounds of pull. The effective range would be 150 to 200 meters. This is not a ceremonial object. It is a weapon, functional and deadly, placed in the tomb because the king might need to hunt or defend himself in the afterlife. After Tutankhamun's death, power passes to I, then to Horemheb, a general who stabilizes the kingdom. The 19th dynasty begins with Ramesses I, another military man, but it is his grandson, Ramesses II, who dominates. Ramesses II rules for 66 years, from approximately 1279 to 1213 BC. He is a builder on a colossal scale. He completes the hypostyle hall at Karnak, begun by his father Seti I. He builds the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple on the west bank at Thebes. He carves temples into the cliffs at Abu Simbel in Nubia, 2 temples, the larger with 4 seated colossi of Ramesses himself, each over 20 meters tall, flanking the entrance. Twice a year, on specific dates, the rising sun penetrates the temple's inner sanctuary, illuminating statues of the gods and Ramesses himself. Ramesses fights the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BC. He claims great victory, having the battle depicted on temple walls across Egypt. In reality, the battle is a draw. What follows is more significant: the first recorded peace treaty in history, between Ramesses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III, inscribed in both Egyptian and Hittite versions, establishing borders, promising mutual defense, and arranging dynastic marriages. A copy of this treaty hangs in the United Nations building in New York, symbol of ancient diplomacy. Ramesses lives long enough to outlive many of his sons. He fathers over 100 children by various wives and concubines. When he dies, he is buried in the Valley of the Kings, his mummy later moved by priests to a cache tomb to protect it from grave robbers. In 1881, his mummy is discovered along with dozens of other royal mummies. In 1976, when his mummy shows signs of deterioration, it is flown to Paris for treatment. It receives a passport listing his occupation as king, deceased. Even in death, even 3,200 years after his life, Ramesses travels with royal dignity. The later Ramessides continue building, but the empire is under increasing pressure. The Sea Peoples, still not fully identified, but likely displaced populations from the Aegean and Anatolia, driven by climate change and the collapse of Bronze Age civilizations, attack Egypt by land and sea. Ramesses III defeats them in battles on the coast and in the Nile Delta around 1178 BCE, but the cost is enormous. The reliefs at his mortuary temple, Medinet Habu, show naval battles with detailed depictions of ships, warriors, and the chaos of combat. But economic strain follows military expenditure. Tomb workers at Deir el-Medina, the village where the artisans who built and decorated the royal tombs lived, go on strike when their grain rations are delayed. They march to the mortuary temples, sit down, and refuse to work. Their complaints are recorded: "We are hungry. 18 days have passed in this month." Eventually, they are paid, but the incident reveals cracks in the system. The third intermediate period sees Egypt fragment into competing power centers. The 21st dynasty rules from Tanis in the Delta while the high priests of Ammonius control Thebes. Power is divided, and neither center can claim full legitimacy. Later, Nubian kings of the 25th dynasty rule from the south, presenting themselves as restorers of traditional Egyptian values against the fragmented north. The Assyrians invade in the 7th century BCE, sacking Thebes in 664 BC. The Persians conquer Egypt in 525 BCE, incorporating it into their empire. Native Egyptian dynasties briefly reassert independence, the 28th, 29th, and 30th dynasties, but these are short-lived. Alexander the Great arrives in 332 BCE, welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. He is crowned pharaoh, visits the oracle of Ammonius at Siwa Oasis, which allegedly confirms his divine parentage, and founds the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast. When Alexander dies in 323 BCE, his general Ptolemy takes control of Egypt, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemies are Greek, but they adopt Egyptian symbols and practices to legitimize their rule. They build temples in traditional Egyptian style, Edfu, Dendera, Philae, with hieroglyphic inscriptions and reliefs depicting them as pharaohs making offerings to Egyptian gods. They are cosmopolitan, ruling from Alexandria, which becomes one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria attempts to collect all human knowledge. Scholars come from across the Mediterranean. Euclid writes his Elements of Geometry here. Eratosthenes calculates the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy. But the Ptolemies also intermarry brother-sister marriages in the pharaonic tradition and engage in dynastic intrigue, civil wars, and assassinations. By the time Cleopatra VII takes the throne in 51 BC, Egypt is a client state of Rome in all but name. Cleopatra is ethnically Greek but presents herself in Egyptian modes. She is the first of the Ptolemaic rulers to learn the Egyptian language. She aligns with Julius Caesar, then with Mark Antony, attempting to preserve Egyptian independence through personal diplomacy and strategic alliances. She bears children to both men. But Rome, under Octavian, later Augustus, is too powerful. The naval battle of Actium in 31 BC ends in defeat. Cleopatra and Antony commit suicide. Egypt becomes a Roman province in 30 BCE. The temples continue to function under Roman rule. Priests still perform rituals, though the old order is fading. The last hieroglyphic inscription is carved at the Temple of Philae in 394 CE. After that, the knowledge of how to read the script dies. Christianity spreads through Egypt. The old temples are closed, converted into churches, or simply abandoned. The Coptic language, descended from ancient Egyptian but written in a modified Greek alphabet, becomes the language of Egyptian Christians. But the connection to the pharaonic past is severed. For over 1,500 years, the hieroglyphs are silent. The temples stand, weathered and half-buried, described by travelers as ruins of mysterious, forgotten civilizations. The pyramids are stripped of their smooth limestone casing by medieval builders who need the stone for Cairo's mosques and fortifications. The rough core masonry is exposed. Theories proliferate. The pyramids were built by giants, by Atlanteans, by anyone except the people whose hieroglyphic inscriptions cover every temple wall. Napoleon invades Egypt in 1798, bringing not only soldiers but a team of scholars, the Commission des Sciences et des Arts. They survey, measure, draw, and collect. Vivant Denon sketches temples and monuments. Engineers calculate the pyramid's geometry and internal angles. And in 1799, a French soldier working on fortifications near the town of Rosetta uncovers a black granite stele broken at the top. It bears 3 scripts, Greek at the bottom, Demotic, a cursive Egyptian script, in the middle, and hieroglyphic at the top. It is the same decree, issued by Ptolemy V in 196 BCE, in 3 languages. The British defeat the French and take the stone as spoils of war. It ends up in the British Museum, where it remains. But copies circulate among scholars. Thomas Young, an English polymath, makes initial progress, identifying that some hieroglyphs are phonetic. But it is Jean-François Champollion, a French scholar obsessed with Egypt since childhood, who cracks the code fully in 1822. Champollion realizes the hieroglyphs are not purely symbolic or alphabetic but a complex system combining phonetic signs, representing sounds, logograms, representing words or concepts, and determinatives, clarifying meaning. He identifies the cartouches, oval rings, as containing royal names. He works backward from the Greek names Ptolemy and Cleopatra, identifying the phonetic values of individual signs. Then he applies those values to older texts. The system unlocks. The inscriptions begin to speak. The names of kings carved in stone match the king lists compiled by ancient scribes. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious literature in the world, inscribed in the burial chambers of 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids, become readable. Administrative records, love poems, medical treatises, magical spells, victory inscriptions, complaints from workers, letters between officials, all of it becomes accessible. Archaeology adds layers of understanding. Auguste Mariette founds the Egyptian Antiquities Service and begins systematic excavation. Flinders Petrie develops stratigraphic excavation methods, recording context and pottery sequences to establish chronologies. Gaston Maspero discovers and documents the pyramid texts. Howard Carter discovers Tutankhamun's tomb. Zahi Hawass and others continue the work, mapping, excavating, conserving. Modern technology reveals even more. Ground-penetrating radar detects hidden chambers and structures beneath sand. Satellite imagery identifies ancient settlements and landscape modifications invisible from ground level. Muon tomography, using cosmic ray particles, scans the interiors of pyramids looking for hidden voids. DNA analysis of mummies reveals genetic relationships, diseases, dietary patterns, and causes of death. Isotope analysis of teeth shows where individuals spent their childhoods. Computer modeling tests hypotheses about construction methods, simulating ramps, levers, and labor organization. What emerges is not a static, mystical civilization but a dynamic culture that lasted over 3,000 years, longer than the span from the fall of Rome to the present day. Egyptian history is not a single story but a succession of kingdoms, dynasties, innovations, crises, adaptations, and transformations. They were not perfect. They were hierarchical, often brutal to enemies, occasionally fractured by civil war and social upheaval. But they were also brilliant engineers who understood leverage, friction, and structural forces without modern physics. They were sophisticated administrators who managed resources across hundreds of kilometers using a complex bureaucracy of scribes, officials, and standardized measures. They were masterful artists who created works of enduring beauty in stone, metal, wood, and pigment. They were careful observers of the natural world who tracked the stars, measured time, performed surgeries, and compiled medical knowledge. And they believed, deeply, across millennia, that order could be maintained, that knowledge could be preserved, that human work could touch eternity. The pyramids still stand at Giza, visible from Cairo, monumental and precise. Karnak still rises from the desert at Luxor, its columns forest-thick, its walls covered in hieroglyphs and reliefs. The sculptures still gaze from museum galleries with painted eyes that seem aware. The mummies lie in climate-controlled cases, their faces preserved across millennia. The objects of daily life, bread molds, sandals, cosmetic jars, children's toys, sit in storage rooms and display cases, testament to ordinary lives lived thousands of years ago. And the river continues. The Aswan High Dam, completed in 1970, ends the annual flood, but the Nile still flows north through the same valley, past the same cliffs, through the same desert. Farmers still work the black earth. Cities still cluster on the banks. The rhythms have changed, but the river remains. Egypt taught the world that stone can be shaped, that knowledge can be written and preserved, that complex societies can organize labor and resources on a scale that defies imagination. They showed that human beings, working together across generations, can build something that outlasts dynasties, religions, languages, empires, and even memory itself. The water keeps its memory, carrying sediment from the African highlands, indifferent to the cities on its banks. The stone keeps its silence, but inscribed with words that, after centuries of darkness, speak again. Both, if you listen carefully, still tell the story of a civilization that believed in permanence, that reached for eternity, and that succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. The sun rises over the eastern desert, as it has for millions of years, as it did when the first stone was laid at Saqqara, as it did when Ramesses carved his image into Nubian cliffs, as it did when the last hieroglyph was written at Philae, and as it does now over ruins and restorations, over a past that refuses to remain entirely past. This is Egypt. Not a mystery. A history.